They forgot her, but she'll never have to remember that. Because the ones who stayed, that's her real family now. My name's Derek. I'm 38, live in Bitter Creek, Oregon, and I co-own a cybersecurity firm that operates out of a small tech hub near Ashwood Ridge. The house my wife and I bought 8 years ago is tiny by Silicon Valley standards, but it's warm, full of sunlight, and filled with the kind of laughter that only a kid like Ivy, our 9-year-old daughter, can bring into your life. Ivy is the reason I left behind the chaos of my old life in Idaho. She's why I get up every morning, why I work too much, and why I keep choosing peace over pride. That wasn't always the case. I used to hold grudges like they were oxygen, and for a long time, nothing ever cut deeper than my own family. 14 years ago, I left Deerfield, Idaho, for good. At least, that was the plan. It was Christmas night, the house was dark, and I slipped out with my backpack and a bitter heart. I was 24, home for the holidays during my last year of college, and all it took was a few words, one snide sentence from my mother, for the final thread to snap. I left behind everything, my childhood bedroom, a broken sense of belonging, and a hand-scribbled note that simply said, "If I'm invisible to you, then I'm already gone." I hadn't spoken to them since. The silence wasn't cold, it was peaceful, like waking up from a nightmare and finally breathing again. That was until 3 weeks ago. I was helping Ivy cut out paper snowflakes in the living room while my wife Marla stirred a pot of soup in the kitchen. The windows were fogged from the heat inside, and the world outside was powdered in snow. I was just settling into the moment when my phone rang. The screen flashed an unfamiliar area code, and I almost let it ring out. I wish I had, but I picked up. On the other end, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade, Rita, my mother. It didn't even take a second to recognize her. My entire chest locked up like something inside me remembered a version of her that no longer existed. She didn't say hello. She just started asking questions like no time had passed. "How's work?" she said. "How's your little girl?" Her tone was light, almost cheerful, like she hadn't iced me out of her life and forgotten I existed. I interrupted her, asked how she got my number. She paused and then said it was from Lonnie, my cousin, the only person from back home I had any remaining contact with. Then she dropped the real reason for calling. "Your father and I want to invite you, Marla, and Ivy for Christmas dinner," she said. "We're doing a big thing this year. The whole family will be there. We'd love to see you." There was a beat of silence. The same silence I remember sitting in for years in that house. Then I asked her one question, flat and unfiltered. "You want me to come back so you can ignore me again like you did that night?" She sighed like I was bringing up old nonsense. "You can't live in the past forever, Derek. That was just one mistake. We were going to make it up to you, but you disappeared before we had the chance." The second she tried to spin it like I was the one who bailed before the healing could begin, I felt something shift in my chest. That cold, hard feeling I'd buried came surging right back. I didn't yell, but my voice got sharper, harder. "So it's my fault now?" I asked. "You forgot me, and now you're saying it's because I left?" She tried to soften her tone, probably realizing how fast she was losing control of the conversation. "I don't want to argue," she said. "Dinner starts at 6. I hope you come." And then, just like that, she hung up. Not even a goodbye. The call ended, but I stood there for a long minute, phone still in my hand, staring out the window like it might offer me a way to erase everything I just heard. I didn't want to tell Marla about it right away, but I don't keep things from her. So I walked into the kitchen, poured 2 mugs of tea, and sat down with her at the table. She listened quietly as I explained, sipping slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. Then she asked if I was planning to go. My first instinct, the one I didn't even have to think about, was a firm no, but she didn't press. She just nodded, then said something I hadn't expected. "Ivy should know who her grandparents are," she said. "Even if it's just once. Even if it doesn't go well." I was about to respond when Ivy looked up from the floor and asked, "I have grandparents, too?" Her voice was full of wonder, not pain. And that simple question felt like a hook in my ribs. I walked over, knelt beside her, and said, "Yeah, you do." Her face lit up like we'd just told her Santa was real again. She immediately started listing what kind of Christmas card she was going to make for them. I didn't want to say yes, but I also didn't want her first memory of that side of the family to be a mystery filled with adult silence. So I gave in. I nodded, promised her she'd meet them, and tried to smile through the anxiety building in my chest. The week leading up to the trip felt like a countdown to something I couldn't avoid. I didn't sleep well. I kept picturing the hallway, the chipped white door, the uneven wood paneling near the basement stairs. By the time the day arrived, my nerves were already frayed. We got there early, 5 o'clock sharp. I figured it was better to beat the crowd and give Ivy some space to ease into things. The yard hadn't changed much. Same sagging fence, same bent gate. Marla squeezed my hand as we walked up the path. Ivy bounced ahead, clutching her homemade card like it was treasure. We walked into the living room, and the first face I saw was Bryce, my older brother, the one who always got the praise, the attention, the gifts. He was lounging with a beer in hand, same smug grin on his face. His wife sat beside him scrolling through her phone, and their 2 boys were glued to a tablet on the couch. "Look who decided to crawl out of his cave," Bryce said. Not a greeting, not even sarcasm, just a reminder that I didn't belong here. I ignored him. I had no energy to entertain old games. Then Rita walked in from the kitchen. She stopped, looked at Ivy for 2 seconds, smiled stiffly, and said, "I'm your grandma." She patted Ivy's head once like she was petting a neighbor's dog. That was it. No hug, no warmth, no instinct to kneel and see her granddaughter's face up close. Marla didn't say anything. She just looked at me and gave me that gentle nudge with her hand that meant, "Not yet. Don't react." When Marshall came in from the garage, he didn't even look at us. He nodded at Marla, ignored Ivy completely, and walked straight past like we were an inconvenient draft of cold air. Ivy noticed. She shifted closer to my leg and whispered, "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" I knelt beside her and said, "Not at all. You're perfect." I tried to believe my own words. We spent the next hour walking around the house, showing Ivy old spots, my bedroom, the tree in the yard, the hallway where I used to race my toy cars. Ivy asked questions, curious and bright, completely unaware of the tension humming in every corner of that place. Then I saw Lonnie arrive. And behind him, Wes, the only one I had stayed in touch with all these years. His daughter Ellie ran up and hugged Ivy like they were lifelong friends, which made the moment lighter, almost normal. But I could feel the storm coming. I didn't know when it would hit, but I knew it was just waiting for the right time to knock the wind out of me. Again, Ivy didn't notice how stiff the air in that house had become, but I felt it in every step we took from room to room. It was like the walls themselves were holding their breath, pretending this reunion wasn't coated in frost. Marla did her best to keep things light, pointing out funny-looking knickknacks in the hallway and asking Ivy what she wanted to play after dinner. I answered when I had to, nodded when I didn't have the words, and mostly kept my focus on Ivy's reactions. I wanted to shield her from every small silence and glance, but it was becoming more and more clear that even at 9, she could sense the weirdness around her. At some point, while Ivy and Ellie were drawing pictures at the end of the dining table, Wes leaned closer to me and said, "You all right?" I gave a short nod, but I think he saw through it. He didn't push. He just poured us both a glass of water and changed the subject. We talked about his shop out in Clayton Falls, how business had been slow in winter, but he didn't mind because it gave him time to be home more. I told him about Ivy's obsession with stop-motion animation and how she'd been using my old webcam to make these tiny films with construction paper characters. He laughed and said Ellie was in a bead bracelet phase, and the last time he walked through the house barefoot he nearly bled out from stepping on one. It helped, just a little. A small pocket of normal in a room full of people who still saw me as the ghost who walked out of their lives without permission. I saw more relatives trickle in. Uncle Rich and Aunt Marlene came bearing some generic box of grocery store cookies. Thomas arrived late as usual with his 2 boys and a wife who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. He gave me a once-over when we crossed paths in the hallway, then leaned into his wife and said something I couldn't hear. But I didn't need to hear it. The smirk on his face said enough. Marla noticed too. She gave my hand a small squeeze, the kind she gives when she knows I'm about to break my silence. By the time Rita stood up to speak, there were about 20 people spread across the living room and dining area. Most were sipping cider, chatting about old coworkers, property taxes, and which kids were getting too much screen time. Ivy and Ellie had retreated to the corner with their drawing pads, legs crossed, heads together, whispering like best friends. When Rita clapped her hands for attention, the room hushed, not out of respect, but out of practiced habit. This, she said, might be the happiest I've felt in years. Our family, finally all under one roof again. I looked at her while she spoke, and for a brief moment, I believed she might actually mean it. But the feeling didn't last. As soon as she sat down, Bryce took over the room again like he always had, telling a story about some board meeting he dominated, acting like we all came here just to admire his financial wizardry. He made sure to mention how he was mentoring a couple of interns from a prestigious university. He always had to make sure everyone knew he was the successful one, the son that counted. Dinner came and went. The food was decent, though most of it was reheated or store-bought. Rita used to bake every dish from scratch when I was a kid. Now it seemed like the performance mattered more than the taste. Ivy barely touched her mashed potatoes, too focused on showing Ellie how to draw bubble letters. Marla and I barely spoke, just exchanged glances every few minutes to silently check in. Wes and his wife Jana were seated beside us, talking about a camping trip they'd taken last fall where the tent collapsed in the middle of a thunderstorm. It should have been funny, but I felt myself fading out halfway through the story, like my brain was too busy bracing for something else. Then, after dessert, it happened. Rita stood up again and clapped her hands. "Okay, time for presents," she said, smiling wide like this was the peak of the night. The kids gathered fast, drawn to the glow of the Christmas tree like it had a gravitational pull. 5 big gift bags were neatly arranged underneath, colorful and tall, each with shiny metallic bows. Rita began reading names off the tags. "This one's for you, Ryder," she said, handing Bryce's oldest son a gift nearly half his height. The boy tore into it like a shark and pulled out a remote-controlled car that probably cost more than my electric bill. Next came Thomas's 2 boys, each getting an enormous Lego set wrapped with precision. Ellie got a deluxe art kit, every shade of paint and marker imaginable tucked into a plastic case that clicked loudly when she opened it. One by one, the kids beamed as they unwrapped their treasures. Laughter filled the room. Ivy's eyes sparkled with excitement. She tugged gently on my sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, which one is mine?" I smiled and said, "We'll find out soon," but I already felt my stomach beginning to knot. Rita was down to the last gift bag. She looked at it, then at the room, and finally placed it in Ryder's younger brother's lap. The room quieted a bit. Ivy looked up at me, then looked at the empty space beneath the tree. She blinked, confused. I didn't hesitate. I stood up. "Where's Ivy's gift?" I asked, not loud but loud enough that everyone heard. Rita turned to me, her face pulling into a strained smile. "Oh," she said, like she'd just remembered she left something in the oven. We must have forgotten her. Forgotten, just like that. Not sorry, not a flinch of guilt, just tossed out like a casual oversight. I looked down at Ivy. Her face collapsed into itself, lips pressed tight, eyes brimming with tears that hadn't yet fallen. Marla pulled her close, wrapping both arms around her while Ivy trembled. She didn't wail or scream. She just shook silently, like her little body didn't know how to process what had just happened. Then Marshall chimed in from the kitchen doorway. "You disappear for over a decade, and now you expect gifts? For what?" His voice was flat, full of something between resentment and pride. Bryce added his own garbage immediately after. "Come on, she's not gonna be scarred for life over a missed present. Kids cry. They get over it. Unless she's gonna write a goodbye letter and run off too, like you did." That's when I started moving toward him. Wes grabbed my elbow before I got too close. I wasn't going to swing, not in front of Ivy, but it was close. Then Thomas, still holding a drink he hadn't put down all evening, laughed and muttered, "Relax, man. You've got money now, right? Use it to fix the scene." As if that wasn't enough, I heard one of the kids, either Thomas's or Bryce's, say, "She's crying because her family's poor. That's why she didn't get anything." Another voice added, "Maybe she's not really part of the family. Maybe that's why." And still, no one stopped them. No one corrected them. No one told them to be kind. Ivy was still buried in Marla's arms, her tiny shoulders shaking. I turned, looked at the room, and said clearly, "Don't ever speak about my daughter like that again. I don't care who you are." Silence followed. Even Bryce shut up for once. Then something happened I didn't expect. Ellie walked over and held out a small eraser shaped like a star, the kind that came with her art set. Here, she said. You can use this while we draw. Ivy lifted her head just enough to look. Her eyes met Ellie's, and for a second, she stopped trembling. She reached out slowly and took the eraser like it was made of glass. Ellie just smiled and went back to the drawing pad. Ivy turned to me, eyes still damp, and asked quietly, "Did you bring anything for me?" I nodded, pulled out a folded sheet from my back pocket, and handed it to her. She unfolded it, read the top line, and gasped. "You got tickets?" she shouted. "To Fun World?" "Really?" Her whole face lit up, and the room turned to look. I stepped forward, pulled 5 more tickets from my coat, and held them in the air. "These were meant for all the kids here," I said. "A full day at Fun World in March, chaperoned and paid for." I paused and scanned the room. But only 2 of these are being used now. The others are no longer up for grabs. The moment those words left my mouth, you could feel the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. The adults stared at me like I'd thrown a bomb into their comfortable little performance, like I'd broken some silent rule that said I wasn't allowed to speak with authority. Bryce opened his mouth to object, but before he could say anything, I handed one of the remaining tickets to Ellie and looked her in the eyes. "This one's for your kindness," I told her, "for stepping up when no one else did." Ellie held the ticket with both hands like it might vanish if she let go. She looked over at Ivy, then back at me, and said in a small voice, "So I really get to go too?" I smiled, patted her on the shoulder, and said, "Of course you do." Then I raised the other 4 tickets just enough so everyone could see them clearly, every eye fixed on my hand like I was dangling their last piece of dignity in front of them. "These were for the rest of the kids here," I said calmly. "But after tonight, I've changed my mind. These will be reassigned to adults who know how to treat a child like she matters." Gasps, mutters, and angry half-whispers started spreading around the room like a wildfire. Thomas looked like he was going to explode. Bryce shot up from his chair and stepped forward. "You think this is fair?" he snapped. "To punish my boys because of something they didn't do?" I turned to him, kept my voice steady, and replied, "Did anyone here care what was fair to Ivy?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, breathing heavy through his nose like a cartoon bull. Then Thomas chimed in, still holding that drink like it was a prop that made him important. "You can't do this in front of the kids. You're going to traumatize them." At that point, Wes stood up beside me. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to cut through the tension. "Did anyone here think about how Ivy felt when she was left out completely? Or were you all too busy pretending nothing happened?" Then he turned to Thomas and added, "Maybe you should teach your kids not to mock others while they're crying." Everything got quiet for a few seconds, like the air itself didn't know which direction to flow. Then Marshall stood up slowly from his seat near the kitchen and walked toward us. His face was red, not from embarrassment, but from simmering anger that he'd kept tucked away all night. "Why are you all listening to him?" he barked. "What's he ever done for this family besides disappear and come back to show off? How do we even know he bought those tickets? A trip like that would cost what, 10, 15 grand? You really think he paid for all that just to play hero for 5 minutes?" Before I could respond, Wes cut in, sharper this time. "Then pull out your phone," he said to Marshall. "Open up a browser. Type in Net Secure Point Technologies. Go to the About page. Look under Founders. You'll see Derek's name right there." Rita stood frozen, eyes flicking between her husband and Wes like she couldn't decide who just betrayed her more. Thomas leaned over to Bryce and muttered something about seeing the company mentioned in a tech magazine last fall. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Half the room was already reaching for their phones, thumbs flying, eyes widening as they put the pieces together. I stood there and let the silence stretch. Ivy had stopped crying. She was now sitting with Ellie, gently tracing the lettering on her ticket while they whispered to each other. Marla stayed close behind them, one hand on Ivy's shoulder, her other clutched around the strap of her purse like she was ready to leave the second I gave the word. Jana, Wes's wife, leaned over and quietly told Marla, "We've got your back." A minute later, I nodded to Marla, and she helped Ivy up from the floor. I gave one last look at the group, offered Wes a quiet thank you with just a glance, and started walking toward the door. Not one person moved to stop us. Not one came to say goodbye. We walked out without a word. The wind had picked up by the time we got to the car, slicing through our jackets like it wanted to punish us for trying to bring light into that cold, forgotten house. I helped Ivy into her seat, buckled her in gently, and whispered, "You okay, baby?" She nodded slowly. "I'm just happy we're going to the amusement park," she said. "I don't care about them." I smiled, kissed her forehead, and closed the door. The ride home was quiet at first. Marla held my hand the whole way, squeezing it tighter whenever my jaw clenched or I started blinking too fast. Ivy eventually fell asleep, her head tilted against the window, one hand still gripping the folded ticket like a lifeline. When we got home, I carried her to bed, tucked her in, and watched her breathe for a few minutes before turning out the light. Marla met me in the kitchen with 2 mugs of cocoa already steaming. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for standing up, for not letting them get away with it again." I nodded but didn't answer. Not yet. The next morning, I was making eggs when Marla came into the kitchen, phone in hand, a tight look on her face. "You're not gonna like this," she said. Check Reddit. Family drama thread. I wiped my hands on a towel, pulled out my phone, and opened the app. Right at the top was a post that had already racked up thousands of comments and upvotes. The author? Bryce. He had written a novel-length post claiming that I, the estranged tech bro brother, had stormed into the family Christmas and used wealth to humiliate his innocent children, turning a holiday gathering into a public spectacle. He painted himself as a loving father, tried to spin the story like Ivy had a meltdown over not getting a gift, and that I retaliated by dangling a trip over everyone's heads to make them feel small. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I called Wes. "Do you remember if Jana was filming last night?" I asked. "I think she had her phone up during the gift part." Wes didn't even let me finish. "She's already on it," he said. "She posted the video under the post 15 minutes ago. Full footage, no edits." And she added a caption that said, "Here's the part my cousin conveniently left out." I pulled the post back up and sure enough, there it was, Jana's reply, complete with the clip. You could see Ivy's face as she waited. You could hear the exact moment Rita said, "Oh, we forgot her." You could hear the other kids mocking her. You could hear my voice, calm but firm, stepping in. No theatrics, no yelling, just the truth. And the comment section? It was already turning. Fast. People were tearing into Bryce, calling him manipulative, petty, pathetic. Dozens of users shared their own stories of being the forgotten kid, the scapegoat sibling, the one who walked away from a family that never really saw them. Jana added a follow-up post explaining everything clearly and factually, from the way Ivy had been treated to the history between me and the rest of the family. Within an hour, Bryce's post had been deleted. Not edited. Not updated. Gone. I didn't comment. I didn't post a thing. I didn't have to. The truth was walking its own path now. It didn't need my voice to carry it. Later that day, Wes sent me a text. "I'm glad you came," he wrote. "They needed to be reminded who you really are. And so did you." I didn't reply right away, just stared at the message and let it settle into the parts of me that still felt sore. After a while, I typed one line. "Thanks for standing beside me." That was it. That was all I needed to say. Because for the first time in years, someone actually had. After Bryce's post vanished and the full video kept circulating across different threads, something changed in the silence that followed. Nobody from my family reached out directly, but the absence of calls or messages said more than any angry voicemail ever could. They had nothing left to say because for once, the truth had been laid out in public, where no one could twist it without being exposed. And for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the guilt that had always followed me like a shadow. I didn't feel the need to second-guess myself or wonder if I'd gone too far. I'd stood up for my daughter when no one else would, and that alone was enough. We spent the next few days laying low, taking Ivy to her favorite diner, walking the trails behind our neighborhood, and doing whatever it took to create new memories that weren't tied to anything bitter or broken. Marla kept checking in on me, gently but persistently, reminding me to talk through things before they calcified into quiet rage. She knew my habit of internalizing everything until it boiled over. And honestly, I appreciated that more than I could explain. Ivy, on the other hand, bounced back quickly. Kids are resilient in ways adults forget how to be. Her world didn't revolve around one ruined night. She just kept talking about the upcoming Fun World trip with Ellie, making lists of rides to try and snacks she planned to eat twice. Then, just as things started to settle, the next blow came in an entirely different form. It was Marla who saw the news first. She was checking her emails when she gasped and handed me her phone. "Look at this," she said. It was a local news article from Deerfield, buried a few scrolls down the homepage. The headline read, "Local executive dismissed following internal audit allegations." The photo attached? Bryce, standing outside a courthouse in his signature navy blazer, looking like someone who just realized the cameras were not his allies this time. I didn't even have to read the article. I already knew. I skimmed it anyway, just to confirm the details. The company he worked for had been conducting an audit after an anonymous tip regarding misappropriated client funds. Several misfiled transfers had been traced back to Bryce's access credentials. They hadn't arrested him yet, but he'd been let go without severance and referred to external investigators. According to the piece, multiple investments he had claimed were company-backed had been nothing more than private side hustles funneling money from accounts he shouldn't have touched. Marla sat beside me and said nothing for a while. Then, finally, she said, "This isn't even shocking. He always thought the rules were for other people." What shocked me more came a few days later. I had just gotten home from the office when Marla met me at the door with a strange look on her face. "Someone rang the bell earlier," she said. "You're going to want to see the footage." We had a small camera installed by the front gate, just a basic motion sensor model to keep track of packages and the occasional solicitor. I opened the app and pulled up the recording. There, standing at the gate in their wrinkled coats, were Rita and Marshall. No suitcases, no gifts, no warmth in their posture. Just two people who looked like time had finally caught up to them. I stared at the screen for several seconds, trying to feel something: anger, pity, confusion, but all I felt was empty. They hadn't called first. They hadn't written. They just showed up, as if the last 14 years didn't exist, as if their silence hadn't defined every part of our relationship since I walked out of their house at 24. I didn't open the gate. I didn't even go outside. Instead, I walked to my office, printed out a sheet of paper with the contact information of a local crisis support shelter, and left it inside the mailbox near the sidewalk. That was my response. That was all I could give them. They stood there for a few more minutes, checking their phones, probably hoping I'd suddenly change my mind. I didn't. Eventually, they turned and left. But they weren't done yet. A few days after that, my phone rang again. Unknown number, but this time I answered. The voice on the other end belonged to Uncle Rich, my dad's younger brother. He didn't waste time pretending. "Derek," he said, "I know there's bad blood, but do you have to be this harsh? They're your parents." I stayed quiet for a moment, then asked calmly, "You were at the dinner, weren't you?" He hesitated. "You heard everything that was said to my daughter, didn't you?" Again, silence. Then a long sigh. "Look, I'm not saying they were right, but people say things in the heat of the moment." That sentence alone nearly pushed me past the edge. I took a breath and answered slowly, making sure every word landed. No one said anything in the heat of the moment. They said it with purpose, like they've said it 100 times before. They didn't make a mistake. They revealed who they still are. Rich tried again, softer now. "They're not in a good place, Derek. Bryce dragged them into financial trouble. They co-signed for some of his loans, and now they're on the hook for a lot of it. They had to list their house. They don't have anywhere else to go." My grip tightened around the phone, not from rage this time, but from something colder, steadier. "Then maybe they should stay with you," I said. "Or with someone who stood up for them while they were standing there watching my daughter cry. But I'm not that person. I was once the kid they forgot. Now I'm just the man they can't reach anymore." Rich didn't respond for a while. When he finally spoke, he just said, "You'll regret it if something happens to them." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Maybe, but I'll never regret protecting my daughter." That was the last time anyone from that side of the family called me. Maybe they got the message. Maybe they didn't. I didn't really care. What mattered most came the following spring, when the trip to Fun World finally arrived. Ivy had been counting down the days like it was a holiday. She even packed her bag 2 days early, picking out a notebook to track every ride she went on and every snack she wanted to try. Ellie and Wes's family came with us. The girls ran from ride to ride, screaming with joy, coated in cotton candy, and never once looking back. I remember standing in line for one of the roller coasters, watching Ivy laugh so hard she had to hold onto the railing just to stay upright. That moment stuck with me, maybe forever. Not because it erased everything that happened, but because it reminded me what I was fighting for all along. She wasn't broken. She wasn't fragile. But she needed someone to choose her, publicly and without apology. That's what I did, and I'd do it again. 1,000 times. Later that night, back at the hotel, Ivy looked up at me and asked, "Dad, do I still have grandparents?" I paused before answering. "You have people who love you," I said. "And that's what matters most." She smiled, nodded, and went back to sketching the roller coaster she'd ridden 3 times in a row. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Not healed, not whole, but light. Because I knew without a doubt that I had broken the cycle and I'd never let it touch her again. About 3 months after that trip, I got a text from Wes that simply said, "You seeing this?" followed by a link to a local gossip thread. I clicked it, thinking it was probably some town drama, but the first photo I saw stopped me cold. It was Bryce again. Only this time, he wasn't in court or walking into his old office. He was standing outside a pawn shop, holding a box with what looked like their family heirloom watch collection. I kept scrolling. Someone had taken a picture of Rita and Marshall at a food bank 2 days earlier. The caption underneath said they'd applied for emergency relief housing assistance. I didn't laugh. I didn't even feel angry. I just stared at the images for a long moment, trying to decide whether anything inside me still wanted to react. I thought it might be over, that maybe the last loose ends had finally come untied. But then, 1 week later, another message arrived. This one came from an anonymous account through the contact form on my company's website. The message was short, barely a paragraph. "I've had time to reflect," it read. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I understand if you never forgive me. But I miss my granddaughter, and I'd do anything to see her again." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. I knew it was Rita. The tone, the phrasing, the attempt to sound measured, it was her. I never responded. I showed it to Marla, and she asked me, "What do you want to do?" I told her the truth. I didn't want revenge, and I wasn't seeking to punish them. But I also couldn't allow a second opportunity for Ivy to be hurt in a way she didn't deserve. Forgiveness might have been possible if they'd ever tried to change before they lost everything. But they only reached out after every door had closed. And that wasn't regret. That was desperation. A few days later, I contacted my lawyer and moved forward with something I should have done a long time ago. We filed a no-contact order against Rita, Marshall, and Bryce. The order included a buffer around Ivy's school, Marla's shop, and our home. My lawyer didn't ask many questions. He just said, "You're doing this to protect your daughter. That's what matters." The paperwork was processed quickly, and a few weeks after that, the order was officially enforced. If they showed up again, the police would handle it, not me. Since then, we haven't heard a word. Ivy hasn't asked about them again. She's focused on her school, her art projects, and planning her next sleepover with Ellie. Marla sleeps easier at night, knowing we've drawn a line they can't cross. As for me, I've realized something I wish I'd learned years ago. You don't owe love to people who've weaponized your silence. You don't owe forgiveness to those who only remember your name when they've lost everything else. And most importantly, you don't owe access to your child to people who failed you when you were 1. That last dinner, that single moment where they chose to forget Ivy, told me everything I needed to know about who they still were. Some people, when given another chance, will hurt you exactly the same way, just a little deeper. So here's my advice. If you've walked away from a family who never saw you, don't run back just because they knock louder this time. Protect your peace like it's something sacred, because it is. And if you're lucky enough to have people who love your child the way you wish you'd been loved, hold on to them. They're your family now. Blood is just biology. But love, the real kind, is earned.